It's a Friday show. Power panel, drop it. Now, this particular power panel will stay for the remainder, the whole 2 hours. Johnny Pye, John Idarola, Anna Casper, the friendly host, Kasparian. Washington on West Clark, everybody, back in the house. We got military stuff to talk about. We got every kind of things to talk about. Wes, it's always great to have you. So in the second hour, there's two stories. There's a bunch of stories. I love the whole second hour. But two things. One,
first hour sucks.
First hour was mediocre. No, we got Israel, we got Ukraine. You know the whole spiel, right? Okay, so one story has an amazing fact about how much more African-American preschoolers get suspended than non-African-American preschoolers. I mean, it blew my mind. I mean, I'm used to it, right? We've done 128 stories on stuff like that, and it still blew my mind. You really got to hear that story. It's the amazing fact of the day. And then ironically, I'm a hate on an African-American, but one in particular, Stephen A. Smith. Oh, I'm coming for you. Okay, that guy is loathsome. I'm going to explain why in the second hour. I love that story. So now, and of course, everybody knows on Fridays, we talk about shoptyt.com, not a big deal. Are the stickers up yet, Jesus? Oh, no. Stickers up now on shoptyt.com. Get them, plaster them all over your hometown. I didn't say anything. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying, okay? All right, so great show ahead. John Idarola, go.
Okay, I will, actually. Why don't we start off as we have every day for the past couple of weeks. We're going to be going over to Israel. Just when you thought the international dialogue around what's going on in Gaza couldn't be any less productive, it just might have done so. We've got statements by the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei from Iran. He was speaking to a group of Iranian students, and he had this to say about the conflict and what he thinks should be done vis-a-vis Israel. These crimes, which are beyond imagination and show the true nature of the wolfish and child-killer regime, which the only solution is its destruction. However, until that time, the expansion of the armed resistance of the Palestinians of the West Bank is the only way to confront this wild regime. He goes on to say, as said by Imam Khomeini, Israel must be destroyed. However, until that time, with the help of God, for this cruel and murderous regime to be destroyed, strong confrontation with steadfast armed resistance is the only solution against this destructive regime. Finally, we believe that the West Bank needs to be armed just like Gaza, and those interested in the future of Palestine must become active in this field, referring to guerrilla warfare. Some Western countries, including America and filthy England, defend with clarity the crimes that no ordinary person would. Those are pretty strong words. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Those are just students, by the way. Yeah.
So my sense of this is that kind of how we've been saying all along. So we fault the right-wingers of Israel, and we fault the right-wingers of America in driving us to war. We fault the right-wingers in Hamas for driving us into war. And here comes another right-winger. So in totality, what we have is the right-wingers all united to drive us, all of us, into further war. And if they unite, it's really hard to resist. Because once they start fighting each other, we all get dragged in, right? The rest of us have to stand up against all the right-wingers, whether they're the neocons and the war hawks here in the U.S., or they're the Likud party and Netanyahu in Israel, or they're Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who, of course, wants more violence. Okay, everybody wants more violence if you're in the violence business, if you're in the right-wing business, if you're in the authoritarian business. If you're in the business of war gets me more power, of course they want more violence. We all have to unify in U.S., Israel, Iran, everywhere else, the Palestinian territories, to fight back against that through other means. Wish us luck.
It's kind of incredible, though, because it shows you how right-wing extremism can cloud your better judgment, even when it comes to your political goals, right? So when you really think about it, Benjamin Netanyahu has been trying to convince the United States to invade Iran for quite some time over their nuclear weapons. At the same time, or their nuclear program, I should say. At the same time, the U.S. is trying to negotiate with Iran, and in the middle of all of this, you have this religious leader in Iran saying really, really violent, crazy things. So it's bad for them if Iran genuinely wants to go forward with its nuclear program and say, no, no, we don't want to develop any weapons. We don't want to do anything violent. Well, you have a leader right now who's saying something extremely violent.
Yeah. Now, of course, people will seize upon this and say, you see that, we have to act like this. Now, he's saying things that are violent, like the destruction of Israel. Now, on the other hand, Israel and Hamas are doing things that are violent, right? And so that also, unfortunately, and even actually more so, perpetuates the cycle of violence by actually perpetuating it, by actually doing it, committing it. So none of this is helpful. Now, this is ironic because we've actually been doing a pretty good job with negotiations with Iran, and Iran actually just gave up a lot of their higher grade uranium, meaning, and the UN said that the things that they turned in gives us confidence that they cannot produce a weapon, right? So we were having good progress until hostilities created more hostilities.
Yeah, and so they turned over 200 kilograms of enriched uranium, enough, they say, to produce at least one nuclear weapon if they had the technology to do so. And they didn't turn it over because, you know, we had warships off their coast. They did it because both economic sanctions and pressure that was being put internationally on them economically, combined with some diplomacy. Now, of course, you have, you know, the semi-secular aspect of Iranian leadership, and then you have the religious, you know, section of it. Obviously, they don't have to agree on everything, and over the past few years, they haven't. So him saying this, it's depressing, both because it's easy for him to say that Palestinians should continue to throw themselves in front of Israeli tanks when he's not actually risking his own life, and it's depressing in that those of us who have been paying attention to this know what this cycle of violence has done to Palestinians. We know that there might be some groups that through armed resistance could eventually have their independence in the world, but this is not one of them. It's just not going to happen through that. And as long as a very small segment of Palestinians, like Hamas, continue to use military means to try, or semi-military means to try to get their independence, it becomes all too easy for especially conservative Americans, but people in countries around the globe to just say, well, look at what they're doing. This is who they are. When, as we were saying before the show, if they had someone like, you know, a Martin Luther King Jr. or something like that, we might see very different results at this point.
So one other thing that's important here, look, you have to understand the context. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is not just a religious figure in Iran. He's the most powerful political figure in Iran, even more so than their official elected leader, right? Now, and I make that in quotes, but there actually was an election, and their elected leader is, let's just put it this way, more moderate than their previous leaders, right? But Khamenei is not. He's more right-wing, and he is actually the most powerful person in Iran. He persists throughout all of the elected leaders, and he controls things like the Republican Guard of Iran, which is their most elite force. And they fund Hezbollah, and sometimes they fund Hamas as well. So they have a role in hostilities as well. Now, one of the things he might have seen is that Hamas, after the war began, even though now 800 Palestinians have died, 70 to 80% of them civilians, Hamas's popularity is now over 80% in the occupied territories. Okay, so maybe Khamenei sees that and thinks, if we have hostilities, even over here, well, that doesn't hurt me politically, that helps me politically. So it's an interesting calculus that the more war there is, the pro-war parties do better. It's a damn shame, and they've been playing this trick on us for centuries, if not millennium, and we just haven't caught on.
No, it's human nature. I mean, violence spreads. Once you start it, everybody involved who is attacked, all the relatives of people who were attacked, then they want to respond. It's human nature. But the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to me, is a lot of it's driven by outside actors. Not just Iran, but if you look at everything from the American Jewish community to a lot of people who don't live there, like the head of Hamas, it doesn't hurt them to keep pushing and fanning the war flames. Because they don't have to suffer from it. And it was the same thing when the Balkans broke up. A lot of it was driven by expats who had money to buy weapons and push the more nationalistic people, because if you're sitting in the States or Canada, you can say, yeah, I want this country to be ethnically pure, whatever, my old homeland, and you put money towards that, and you don't have to live there or deal with it. But the people who live there, they're not naturally antagonistic, I think, really, in any country.
So I want to say one thing about you mentioned the American Jewish community there. Now, some of the strongest forces fighting back against the right-wing regime in Israel are also American Jews. Whether it's Glenn Greenwald or Jon Stewart doing a brilliant job of pointing out through humor some of the tragedy that's in Gaza. And the list goes on and on, right? The Sam Cedars, the Katie Halpers, all these people who fight back, right? But it's an interesting phenomenon for a lot of the old school communities here in the U.S. As Wes pointed out, it's comfortably here. They don't have to they're not going to get blown up. It was true of the Irish Americans as well, funding the IRA. So they get to, and there's a lot of money here in the U.S., so they get to fund these war games that makes them feel like tough guys and push their homeland into more and more war, but they get none of the consequences. They get none of the downsides. And so it's a problem we have that's weirdly American because we're so rich and we are so diverse. We have these people from all over the world.
I'd say I don't think it's weirdly American. I just got back from Sri Lanka, and I'm sure you know there was a huge civil war there that went on for years, and a lot of that was driven by expat communities in London and in Canada. I mean, it's every country. When you have an expatriate community that doesn't live there, that has money, they will put money into right-wing reactionary things in their homeland. It's like, you know, they got to be more Catholic than the Pope, type of thing.
Yeah, it's a bit of insecurity too.
Yeah,
right. Like
absolutely.
Sheldon Adelson talks a huge game about Israel, but yet he lives comfortably in Vegas, right? He's not going to get hit by a Hamas rocket. So he says, oh yeah, well then I'll fund things to really hit them hard. But that actually doesn't help the people in Israel. But he doesn't care because he doesn't live there. He thinks he cares. He thinks, I mean, if you told him that, his head would explode. No, I care the most, he thinks. Yeah. But you're not there, man. And so to you, caring is like false pride. Like, yeah, Israel will win. It's not caring that, hey, make sure the people in Israel don't actually get hurt.
Yeah, there's an entire book written about this called The Israel Lobby, written by Mearsheimer, who's a great political scholar. And he talked about the Israel lobby here in the United States and how it continues to fan the flames of war between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And he was branded as an anti-Semite here in the United States. People didn't want to interview him. You actually interviewed him, but you probably don't remember. It was a long time ago. And he made his case. He showed the amount of funding that goes to U.S. politicians from the Israel lobby, how much of an impact it's had in the war there. It's really fascinating stuff.
Well, I had a friend a few years ago, and one of her brothers is a really famous director and writer of comedies, and her other brother wasn't so successful. Married some woman down here. He lived in Watts for a while, and then he got like the Jewish bug. Like, I'm going to get back in touch with my roots. And the rabbi talked him and his African-American wife into move to Israel. So they moved to Israel. Guess where they moved into?
The settlements?
Yeah. That's what they do. They take you, oh, you really want to believe? Come live in the West Bank. I would have a hard time defending Israel because of the West Bank and because of the settlements. And if they didn't have that, they'd be a lot more morally, you know, supportable in some of this.
No
but they're
question.
not.
No question.
So,
I mean, if they didn't have the settlement issue and they didn't have an occupation going on for 47 years, I mean, then when they make the case, hey, what are we supposed to do if Hamas fires rockets at us? Then I'd be 1,000,000% behind you. Yeah. I say, yeah, you're right. I mean, what can you do? I mean, if you gave them the Palestine exists, and they always talk about how, oh, they don't recognize our right to exist. Well, you literally have blocked them from existing as a state for 47 years. This is the most ironic argument you can make. If you had the moral authority and then like it drove me crazy when Hamas was attacking Israel after they gave Gaza back, right? But then it turned out, of course, that they didn't really give it back. They did a permanent blockade. Now we have the tunnels, which are called terror tunnels. But in reality, if you don't have the tunnels, you literally can't get anything in or out of Gaza because it's like a giant prison. Yeah. So it's hard to make any of these cases in favor of Israel having the complete moral high ground because they don't. That drives people crazy when you say that, but it's reality. It doesn't mean that they're wrong about everything. Of course not. Like, this black and white way of looking at it is insanity. Like, unfortunately, there's the crowd. I just came up with a nickname for it, which is unnecessary and ridiculous. But the triple I, Israel is infallible. Okay.
Right, yeah, I was about to be like, nailed it. Yeah, got it.
And of course, Israel's not infallible. That's such a but like whatever Israel does is always right. And then of course there's the other side. Israel's always wrong. No, well, Hamas. you're not helping yourself by firing those rockets. You're being an idiot. This violence doesn't help you. It hurts your own community, right?
Well, it does raise their popularity, apparently. Which
It
I find
helps them
incomprehensible.
No, and again, who is the question, right? Look, like the Iraq War was a disaster, so mission was not accomplished. Except Halliburton's stock price went up 5-fold, so the mission was accomplished, right?
If you care about money.
Right. Israel and Gaza, it's a disaster. Palestinians are dead. The Israelis feel endangered.
Yeah.
Okay, except Netanyahu's more likely to hold on to power. Hamas has 80% popularity in Gaza. So mission is accomplished for the people who started the hostilities.
Hamas could have accomplished their missions if it's about lifting the siege that the Israelis have put them under, and they're willing to let hundreds and what may be potentially thousands of people be bombed and killed to prove a point. It would have been easier if they dug no tunnels and they just let life deteriorate shortly so they could tell the international community, we're starving to death here.
Yeah.
Help us.
Would that actually have an impact?
I think it would. It would have a lot more of an impact.
Well, you remember the Turkish convoy that was trying to bring resources to Gaza, and the Israelis were in the standoff with them. I mean, I think people came down on Israel pretty hard as a result of that. But I think that at least in America, we have a pretty high tolerance for Palestinian suffering, I would say. I think that it's all too easy to lump them in with our enemy of the past decade or so, any other Muslim around the world. And really fast, just because we made the point that you can't look at what Hamas has done and say that this is what Palestinians are like, as you know, we're going to get to Sean Hannity soon. He would like to say that. We also have to, on the other side, acknowledge that, considering that at least America is not going to put that much pressure on Israel to move forward with the peace process, and Hamas is definitely not going to be able to take down Israel. If some sort of massive and durable change is going to happen, it's probably going to have to happen internally in Israeli politics. And it's possible that if the threat of the rockets coming in from Hamas doesn't influence Israeli citizens to push for a change, maybe witnessing the slaughter every 7 or 8 years of 1,000 Palestinians, maybe that will have an effect. And we do have to bear in mind that just yesterday, Israel blocked an ad from an Israeli human rights organization called B'Tselem that was going to read the names of the children that were killed so far in the attacks. You also have a group of Israeli reservists who refuse to go into combat. Like, there are factions in Israel, Israelis, who don't want to continue with this sort of continual occupation and cycle of violence on both sides. That might be the solution long term.
Honestly, I think our only hope is younger Jews.
I would assume that's probably who's fueling both of those.
Both sides have to.
I know, but in this case, Israel is so much stronger. You know that they need to be the ones that eventually act and say, okay, no mas, right? Because the young Palestinians can say no mas forever, and they don't have the power to make it so. Right, so I agree with you that if they went peaceful, it's a million times better.
If they went nonviolent 10 or 15 years ago, there'd already be a Palestine.
Right. Well, no, I totally agree with that.
It would be hard to ignore.
So in the West Bank, in Ramallah, there was a huge 10,000-person protest, and they started walking towards Jerusalem. I love that. Okay, now. Of course, there's claims of violence, and then the Israelis shot at them. And first they say they had the rubber bullets, and then the crowd dispersal, and then 2 people were killed. And they say that they were throwing Molotov cocktails. I don't know. It's entirely possible that somebody in the crowd was, which is an incredibly stupid idea, right? It's also possible that there's propaganda on both sides, right? So, but if it was actually peaceful, a march, I would do that every day. I'd make that into 100,000 people. Everybody in the West Bank walk to Jerusalem.
But it has to be a march that doesn't say, we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's the thing. If you're saying death to these people, who cares if you have 100,000 of them marching? They want to kill you.
Right.
Yeah. I think that was assumed in your example.
Absolutely. No, what they've got to do is, we want our freedom. Like, the Palestinians are maddening. They are the world's worst marketers, right? So on Friday, they have a day of rage. But the West already is so prone to call you terrorists. Why would you do a day of rage? What's wrong with you? Why don't you do a day of sympathy, empathy? You know, hey, look at us. Instead of saying we're going to destroy them, which you have no hope of doing, and I hope you never come close to, why don't you say we want our freedom? I mean, come on. Isn't there any leader with any damn sense over there to say, let's take the 10,000 people, let's turn it into 100,000, and walk towards Jerusalem and say, enough is enough. 47 years. Just keep saying 47, 47, 47, and say, when is it going to be enough? Give us our freedom. We're occupied. Give us our freedom. And if you do it peacefully and you keep marching, and the Israelis keep firing at you, I know a lot of people think it's
really
naive, but it's not.
that.
Eventually, the world will say, God damn it, enough is enough, right?
Yeah.
It happened in India. It happened with civil rights here. It happened in South Africa. It can happen in the occupied territories, too. But you got to do it the right way.
I agree with
It
you, but
wouldn't
it's
have happened
really
in civil rights here if you had a group like Hamas leading the civil rights movement.
Well, but I
It
mean, there
wouldn't have
were
happened.
more extremist, prone to violence sections of the civil rights movement. Thankfully, they just didn't win
They
out.
weren't
They
the
didn't-
leadership of the civil rights movement, though.
Yeah, but I'm saying that perhaps we could see that switch over in Israel as well. Like or Palestine as well. I mean, there are relatively more violent and relatively less violent factions. Right now, unfortunately, Hamas is winning in terms of public approval inside of the Palestinian community, but that doesn't have to be the case necessarily, especially after this occupation, or after this attack.
Look, Fatah can take on the role of Martin Luther King if Hamas is the more extreme version of the civil rights movement that existed.
There's no
right?
Martin Luther King in Fatah.
Well, look,
It's got to be somebody who comes from outside these
But even
organizations.
Shimon Peres, who's been around forever, is now he's president of Israel, about to step down, and he's been prime minister before, etc. Says the best partner we've ever had for peace is Abu Mazen, who is the leader of Fatah right now. Okay, that's Mahmoud Abbas. And every American says it, every Israeli negotiator says it. He's as close as it gets. And now he's really unpopular because he won't resort to violence, whereas Hamas resorts to violence. And the Palestinians are enormously frustrated. So they think, well, Hamas is doing something. What are you doing, right? Well, then get up and march. Do it your way. Do it the peaceful way. And what you do, and if you're at the front of that march every day and you're willing to take the rubber bullets, that shows courage, right? And people respect courage. So if he was in the middle of that march and leading that march every day, I think all of a sudden the approval ratings in Palestine might begin to shift a little bit. Like, hey, Hamas says they're willing to fight back, but Hamas's leader is not in the occupied territories. He's comfortably somewhere else, right? But there's Abu Mazen ready to take a bullet for this, and he's marching in every single day, getting arrested if he has to every single day. And that's how you can make change. You've got to shame them into it.
Yeah. Okay, let me just push through a few more of these elements because we do have a couple of other angles on here that we want to talk about. So just to give you an idea of how the right wing in America is covering this, because that, unfortunately, I think leads to the sort of policies that we have in America towards Palestinians and towards Israelis. This is a snapshot that I took of the front page of Fox News this morning. Let's bring up that picture. You'll see there, battle below, Israel's high tech a match for Hamas's terror tunnels. Which, like I was saying before the show began, in the best case scenario, the tunnels are only a match for the technology and the military might that Israel has. But it's an open question from Fox News' point of view. Like all of what they have that they can buy with the $3 billion that we provide in economic and military support per year might be the equivalent of some tunnels dug in the ground that are used to transport materials to produce explosives and to move around Hamas militants. But it's also used to bring in medicine and food and clothing and raw materials for building and things like that.
I'm sick to death of Fox's propaganda and propaganda all over and in every issue. And so now they're terror tunnels. Now look, do they use the tunnels to bring in weapons? Yes, they do, okay? So do I understand Israel's concern about the tunnels? Of course I do. I get that, right? And I'm the guy who said originally, not a ground invasion, but special forces if you want to take out tunnels or whatever you think is a real threat for Israel, okay? So that's what Israel can do in the short term as they work for peace in the long term. But understand, they're not just terror tunnels. Israel has blockaded, and so has Egypt, Gaza entirely. So some food and medical supplies come in, but they can't export anything, and they certainly can't bring in material to improve Gaza, whether it's construction material, etc. And they can't do trade. They can't leave Gaza. So the tunnels are also literally a pressure valve to bring in material, to bring out material, and yes, sometimes it's weapons, but a lot of times it's bread. A lot of times it's cement. A lot of times it's people, right? Yeah. Because they live in a giant prison. So you have to acknowledge what the tunnels actually are. You also have to acknowledge what Gaza is, which is occupied territory and the world's largest prison. Yeah. It's a fact.
Fox is trying really hard, as a lot of Americans are as well, to make it seem as though both sides are completely equal, especially when it comes to their defense mechanisms. But they're not. We had that conversation on the show yesterday. They're not equal. They're not equal when it comes to military capabilities, defense mechanisms. The Palestinians don't have the ability to defend themselves. They don't have the Iron Dome. So if the Israelis are attacking them, they're screwed. That's why you see such a huge number of casualties on the Palestinian side as opposed to the Israeli side. So I hate when I see these arguments made because it's not true. It is propaganda, and you have to report what the facts are, what the reality is.
Yeah, that makes it look like it's just fireworks, but those are actually dangerous.
I think without Iron Dome, the Israelis would be even harsher than they are, because then you'd have actual lots of deaths in Israel from the rockets, and they'd attack that much harder.
I would make the case that prior to Iron Dome, I don't think the rockets were producing. I mean, maybe the rockets are somewhat more sophisticated or more numerous than they were in previous years, but I don't think there was ever a period when they were causing significant casualties. Nothing compared to what Israeli airstrikes can do. I mean, we saw numbers prior, since 2005, there have been 24 Palestinian casualties for every Israeli casualty. It was a little bit less off, that ratio, prior to 2005, but it was still far, far from even. So I think you're right. I think the reaction that we'd be seeing right now would be different without Iron Dome, but I think that they were already overplaying the threat of the rockets before that was fully set up and fully implemented.
Look, this is the same exact thing we do here in the U.S. We have this monumental military advantage over the rest of the world. And then we obliterate Iraq. I mean, we shock and awe. We just bomb the living hell out of it. By the end of the war, at bare minimum, 200,000 Iraqi civilians are dead because of the damage and violence done by all sides. And then if somebody attacks us, they go, we got goddamn terrorists, you know? Yeah, but they don't have your drones. They don't have your jets. They don't have your, smart bombs. So I'm not excusing their actions, but I also don't want you to excuse our actions, right? So when we kill civilians, whether it's the U.S. or Israel, just saying, well, no, it's okay, I did it with really sophisticated jets and missiles, doesn't excuse it. Doesn't make it any better than them doing a suicide bomb or a car bomb or whatever they have at their disposal. They're wrong, but we're also wrong when we kill 80% civilians, whether it's Israel doing it or us doing it in Iraq.
Yeah, so you saw the front page of Fox News there. Bear in mind that there is no currently more trusted cable news station than Fox, considering that all conservatives basically watch it and the liberals split it up a bit more. And so let's get a sample of what the debate about what's going on in Gaza looks like. Here you're going to see Sean Hannity with Yusuf Munayar, the executive director of the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center in Washington.
In a press release, the pro-Muslim organization said in part, quote, the U.S. government must not remain silent about Israel's unjust and disproportionate use of force against the Palestinians in Gaza because American taxpayers provide Israel with billions of dollars of aid each year. We have a right to demand that those funds not be used to take the lives of innocent civilians. Now, interestingly enough, there was no mention of the terrorist group Hamas and their role in this conflict. After all, they started this conflict. So my question is, why is America's largest Muslim, so-called civil rights group showing sympathy to terrorists?
So you saw the setup right there. I love that he talks about pro-Muslim groups. That's the only group that it's like an insult to say you're pro.
Yeah. What does that mean?
I don't know what it means.
Oh, a pro-Jewish group. What does that mean? That would be crazy, right? But like pro-Muslim is used as derogatory. But the whole framing is insanity. So if you support Palestinians or are worried about civilian deaths in Gaza, sympathy for terrorists.
Right.
It says it in the big graphic. He says it in his script. And then you show sympathy for terrorists. Okay, now he's going to go on. He's going to bring on a guest here, as John's going to explain. But the whole use of the word terrorist is insanity. I'll get to that after we watch the rest of it.
Yeah, why don't we roll the actual interview?
Yusuf, let me ask you this. If I fire 1,600, 2,000 rockets into your neighborhood, I kidnap 3 children in your neighborhood, students, and I kill them. What do you think the proper proportionate response is?
Well, maybe you should stop the ongoing, for decades-long military occupation of Palestinian territory.
Okay, listen,
before you
listen, we
question.
can take it back to the 1948 partition plan, and we can look at the 67 war, the 73 war, and the hostilities it brought to Israel. They did give land for peace 9 years ago. Now I'm asking you a question. If thousands of rockets are fired in your neighborhood, and kids in your neighborhood are kidnapped, what are you going to do?
Sean, if the United States... Sir, I'm going to try to answer your question if you stop badgering me. Thank you. If the United States was invaded by a foreign military and besieged and surrounded, and the food that was coming into the United States was counted by the calories so that people would be put on a diet, as the Israelis claim. Bombs were being dropped. Sir, let me finish. Let me finish.
You're justifying...
Let me finish, and then
you are making a rationalization for rockets and kidnapping and murder, and you expect you want to blame the victims in this case.
The victims?
Wow.
Oh my God. Okay. What would you do?
I think that before the ground invasion, the death toll was literally at one point 500 to 1. Okay, now about 35 Israelis have died during the ground invasion, military predominantly. I think at least 2 civilians have been killed, but mainly military. But the Palestinians, who are 70 to 80%, according to the UN, civilians, they're not the victims. Israel's the victims for having killed them. Okay, now you could just flip Sean Hannity's argument easily the other way and say, well, you know, right now...
4 boys that were on the beach that were murdered.
So the 4 boys on the beach that are clearly killed, right? They're clearly not militants, clearly not Hamas. Every reporter that was there, Western reporters, all said the same thing. I mean, then we got over 800 deaths now. If you take, you know, the rough math there, that's over 600 civilians killed. So we could say to anybody who supports the right-wing government of Israel, well, you supported the murder of 600 civilians. Aren't you sympathizing with civilian murderers? I mean, you're killing these people, and so it's all your fault, and they're the victims. Now, of course, he doesn't do that. Fox News will never do that. No, it's always the Palestinians' fault, and if they ever do anything and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe 800 people dying because of Israel's invasion is not a good thing, they're like, you support terrorism. You see that? For how dare you even say any criticism of Israel, because if you do, you support terrorism.
I'm not even entirely sure why they had them on the show, because obviously he was trying to share his point. His tone didn't go up, like he wasn't angry or aggressive when he was answering. He was just trying to explain his point of view. In the middle of that, as he's giving some facts and some points, he comes in there, Hannity does, and he just totally interrupts him and doesn't allow him to finish his point. Why didn't he allow him to finish his point? Is it because he's giving your audience actual information that goes against your agenda and the propaganda you're trying to give them?
No, he's trying to incite the audience. He's trying to incite the guy he's interviewing to get him to yell back. That's all it is.
And then so he can turn around and say, see, angry Muslims. That's how they are. They're full of rage. Now, the guy was trying to make a point, what would America do if we were occupied? Well, we know what Sean Hannity would do. If we're not even occupied, he had Cliven Bundy on his show all the time saying, grab your weapons against our government, okay? Imagine if another government was occupying us, how Sean Hannity would tell you to grab your weapons then.
No, Jake, it doesn't even... Sorry.
Excuse me, guys, sorry. I'm a little sick. Okay. Showed up anyway to get everybody else sick.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad I'm sitting directly next to you. But it doesn't even take occupying them. Like we've seen just in the past couple of years, news from just this week. If Obama tries to limit the sale of antique firearms containing small amounts of ivory, then they are trying to take away your guns, and he's tyrannical, and you need to take him out. If there's a mandate where you have to buy health insurance, then the Tree of Liberty needs to be watered with blood. Like, it doesn't take anything near occupation. Just like forcing them to have health care in the same way that they have car insurance is enough that they would be firing rockets into the White House. Like, they understand the situation entirely. If you say Happy Holidays as opposed to Merry Christmas, they say the atheists are trying to kill the baby Jesus. Like, we understand how they would react.
Yeah. One more here. Let's watch this, and then we'll get even more angry.
I want to ask Youssef a question. Is Hamas a terrorist organization?
Do I get to actually speak now?
You get to answer the question. It's a simple yes or no question. Is Hamas...
You invited me on here. Sir, you invited me on here as a guest.
I'm asking you a question. Is Hamas, whose charter calls for the destruction of Israel, is that a terrorist organization? That's a yes or no question.
Thank you for your question. And now I will provide an answer.
Finally.
It's very telling to me that, and it should be telling to your viewers as well, by the way, that the moment you have a Palestinian voice on your program who begins to explain the legitimate grievances of Palestinians on the ground, not just
organization.
Hamas.
Answer.
Sir, let me
answer the question.
Finish. Am I a guest on your program, or
yeah, you're a guest, but you don't get to
witness
filibuster.
stand
Answer.
here?
Is Hamas a terrorist organization?
The United States certainly considers Hamas a terrorist organization.
Do you consider?
I
didn't ask what the United States think. I asked what you think. Okay. Can you hear?
Look, if you think that we are going to have any progress in this situation by simply yelling at me, that's not really going to be helpful.
Nicely. Is Hamas
let me ask you, sir, a question at this point.
Is Hamas a terrorist organization? Yes or no?
Let me ask you a question, sir.
No, you don't answer a question with a question. Is Hamas... What part of this can't you get through your thick head? Is Hamas a terrorist organization?
Excuse me?
Yes or no?
I already answered your question.
Yes or no?
I already answered your question.
You did not. You had your chance. You didn't say Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Sir.
Goodbye.
Okay. So if you don't give the answer that I want, you had your chance and you didn't give me what I wanted. So goodbye, okay? I'm not actually going to let you make your points here. I'm not going to bring you on to have a conversation with you. I'm here to yell at you, try to get you angry, and then say you're a sympathizer of terrorists. That's all. That's the whole point. And if you don't play along with that, goodbye, right? So now let's talk about how stupid the word terrorism is. Now everybody uses it, right? We started this. All of our enemies are terrorists. And so now remember, terrorism originally meant if you kill civilians, well, then you're not fighting against the military, you're a terrorist. Now, by that definition, everybody in World War II was terrorists. The Germans were terrorists, the Japanese were terrorists, we were terrorists, the English were terrorists. We firebombed Dresden, we firebombed Tokyo, and let alone the nukes, right? We killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. Then, aren't we terrorists? Fox heads exploding right now. Okay, and then now it's become so ubiquitous that the Russians call the Ukrainians terrorists, the Ukrainians call the Russians terrorists, the Syrian Assad regime calls everyone they're fighting terrorists, some of them actually are, and they call him a terrorist, and on it goes. So all of our enemies, and now everybody's enemy, is always a terrorist. And so it's so easy to say when we kill civilians, we're so well-intentioned. Of course, we're the good guys when we kill them with our bombs. That's okay. That's not terrorism. It looks like a video game, so obviously we're not terrorists. If they fight back and they kill people that are civilians, well, then they're terrorists. The reality is killing civilians on both sides is reprehensible. And unfortunately, our side does it all too often as well. But that you will never see on Fox News. We're the good guys, and even if we kill their civilians at a 500-to-1 ratio, whether it's Israel, Iraq, whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. They're the bad guys, and if you say anything against us, you sympathize with terrorists. No, that's it? Okay.
Yeah, that much is clear. Yeah. I mean, it did once have a definition. I think that if you were to go back before 9/11, I think that people could use the term and it would actually mean something, but it became too powerful as a tool of propaganda by the Bush administration to just label any group that you already were looking to invade, already looking to occupy as terrorists, entire regimes, whether or not they were targeting civilians. It was simply too valuable, and I think that most Americans have just been dulled by the term. It doesn't mean anything to us anymore. They know that it means that somebody's bad, but you feel free to substitute the word Muslim if you want to. Both of them mean pretty much the same thing to most Americans, and I think that Fox News is just continuing that. I honestly don't even know how much value there is left in the term, even for propaganda purposes anymore.
No, it's still clever propaganda. That's why whenever we have domestic terrorism, whether it's sending poison to the president, it's shooting up a Jewish center in Kansas, whatever it might be, if it's from the right wing, it's never, ever called terrorism. Never, right? It's only called terrorism if it's a Muslim person who did it.
Or the left wing.
Or the left wing, yes. Environmental terrorism, that's right. And it works. People go, oh my God, the Muslims are terrorists, oh my God. But the right wing, no, that was just a crazy guy. You can't blame the right wing for that one crazy guy.
It goes into their total mindset, which is, a terrorist is somebody who's trying to change the existing status quo. Whereas what they're doing on the right wing, they're just trying to bring back natural law or make things the way they were.
Yeah.
Right.
That's how they look at it.
And if you attack them by saying you're being hypocritical because we also kill civilians, they go, did you just call America a terrorist?
Yeah.
Okay, and so they feel like they win either way. You see these America haters calling Americans terrorists, etc. So I think that it's a maddening, ridiculous, stupid propaganda trick, but one that's still, unfortunately, somewhat effective.
Yeah, I agree with you, Cenk. It's not only effective in fear-mongering and legitimizing any type of war that Americans want to go into, but also it's a great way of shutting conversations down, much like the clip that we watched with Hannity. You talk about terrorism, you label someone a terrorist, and that's it. There's no negotiating. You don't want to have a conversation with terrorists. You don't want to negotiate with terrorists. Anytime the Obama administration wants to do diplomacy as opposed to going in and bombing a country, oh, they're negotiating with terrorists. So that word has been used in many different ways to get our agenda across.
All right, one last thing. If I was a guest on Hannity's program, it's easy to say in hindsight. You know, I know I'm not blaming the guy. He did the best he could. I mean, that was ridiculous, right? I said, look, in order to answer your question, Sean, I got to know what terrorism means, right? So you tell me what your definition of terrorism is. And he's going to tell you it's killing civilians. And I'm going to say now, according to the numbers that we have from the United Nations, Israel has killed literally 200 times more or 300 times more civilians than the Palestinians are. So are you saying, did you just call Israel a terrorist state? Now Hannity will then say, oh, that's outrageous, how could you? I didn't say that, you said that, and they don't intend to kill civilians and it's all Hamas's fault. So wait, but in your definition of terrorism, you didn't talk about intending to kill civilians, you talked about killing civilians. So again, Sean, I gotta ask you something. Did you just call Israel a terrorist state, right? And then you put him on the defensive, and he's trying to figure it out.
Have you challenged him yet to allow you on his show?
Sean Hannity?
Yeah.
Look, one, I got banned from Fox News a long time.
You can't say they're just scared to have you on. You can't do what they always do by saying, you know, they can't get a certain Democratic guest on. Just be like, you're just a big pussy, Sean. Just have me on. Dude. What are you scared of? What are you scared of?
So then he'll do the usual badgering, but I'll badger right back at him, and then he'll cut my mic. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm sure I'll go. I don't give a shit, right? Good luck to you, Sean, right? That guy's a big blockhead. I mean, it's he has no logic. He has no rationality. It's super easy to dismiss him. So, but I'm not going to ask to be on his show. If he wants to have me on, great. I'll kick his ass all day long, right?
We should start a Twitter campaign. Get Cenk on Hannity.
No, but I don't need to be on his show. Our show is bigger than his show. He should come on this show.
That would be great if he came on the show.
Yeah. Oh, he would never. If he doesn't have the power to cut your mic, you think that pussy could ever dare to get in a real debate where he doesn't control the mics, where he would actually have to hear someone out? He has no logic. He'd run into a roadblock immediately. He'd be dead end. Oh, it does not compute. I do not know how to do this if I can't shut off your mic.
Imagine a situation where Bill Maher has you and Hannity on as his guest. Like, that would be an insane situation. I don't know whose side Maher would be on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll take them both on. Bill Maher and Sean Hannity on the issue of Israel. Come and get it. You want to do it on this show? You want to do it on Bill Maher's show? I mean, you want to consider him neutral even though he's with the right-wing government of Israel? I'll take him I'll call that neutral. No problem, okay? I'll go on Maher's program and kick Sean Hannity's ass left and right, and if Bill wants to jump in, I'll kick his ass too, okay?
I think for once you're oddly optimistic. I think that Hannity is not smart enough to actually craft an argument that people who know enough about the situation would be convinced of his point. I think that's why he shuts down debate. But I also think he is armed with an endless supply of tactics to make it impossible to actually communicate with one another. I think that regardless of whether or not he can shut you down with turning off your mic, I think that he would throw up tangents and wild herrings, and it would be impossible for any information to actually be projected to somebody watching it. That's why I don't watch shows like Sean Hannity's, aside from wanting to pull clips for this.
Any tactics or an arsenal of anything, I just think he'd have a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
Well, that might be one of them.
No, look, we can argue about how stupid Sean Hannity is all day, but
there's not much argument about it, really.
Yeah, no, I don't think that he's got these. He has talking points, but once he's off his script, he's fucked.
Yeah,
okay,
I agree.
He's in a very tightly controlled environment at Fox News, with the power to cut people off and go back to his talking points.
Because he's really a left-winger. It's just Fox News has forced him to change his message.
So I think in an environment where it's not tightly controlled, he'll start shouting and his head will spin, but and he'll throw out talking point after talking point. They won't connect to one another, but he'll throw them out, no question. He'll throw out landmines.
A lot of these TV shows are so highly produced. I mean, you literally have producers telling you what to say. Here are your talking points. Here's what you should regurgitate. It's 100% true. Yeah. So if you took him out of that element or his environment, he would totally fail. Yeah. There's no question about that.
Yet another reason not to watch cable news. Watch us instead.
All right, let's take a quick break here. It's our first one, right? Yeah. All right, we'll try to do non-Israel news. All right, well, the Young Turks, second hour here, all continuing to be a power panel. And a Kasparian takes the reins for this hour. Everybody continue to remember to shop at shoptyt.com for wonderful shirts like the one I'm wearing. And hulu.com/The Young Turks, easy half-an-hour version of the show. So Colbert Report is ending. Let's keep it real. Daily Show and The Young Turks should be your stable diet on Hulu. I'm just okay. Keeping it real. Okay.
Oh, by the way, really fast, just because we mark like milestones on the show, but for Amir and the cast, Pop Trigger passed 100,000 subscribers.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's a pretty big milestone. Yeah,
that is.
So congratulations, all.
And you might not know. So I wish more people knew this. Pop Trigger is also on Hulu, but they actually do a whole different show on Hulu than YouTube. So the show that you see on Hulu for Pop Trigger, you literally can't get anywhere else. So if you like Pop Trigger, you love what they have on Hulu, definitely check that out. Okay, it's a whole different show. Okay, all right, Casper, take it away.
An 80-year-old by the name of Tom Greer shot and killed a 28-year-old pregnant woman who was burglarizing his home, along with a 26-year-old by the name of Gus Adams. Now, the 28-year-old woman, Andrea Miller, was pregnant at the time of the burglary. She did die as a result of him shooting her in the back twice. Now, to give you more context into this story, his home had been burglarized 3 times prior to this, and the 2 burglars had records of doing this in the past. So Tom Greer was under the impression that they were probably the people that continuously burglarized his home. When they had come in, they were doing their thing, they were stealing stuff from him, and then he came home around 9 p.m. and found them. At that point, the 2 burglars allegedly started beating him. He was able to get away, get his hands on a gun, and then he started chasing them out of his home. At that point, he says that he shot at the woman twice in the back, hitting her and then killing her. Now, he did speak to the authorities about this, and he said the following. She says, "Don't shoot me, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby," and I shot her anyway. Greer returned home shortly after 9 p.m., as I mentioned, Tuesday to find the pair in his home. Both suspects attacked him, hitting him with their fists, and ultimately, according to him, body slamming him to the floor, breaking his collarbone. They fled through the garage, and then he says, "The lady didn't run as fast as the man, so I shot her in the back twice. She's dead, but he got away." Now, authorities have not charged him with anything yet, and the police chief in Long Beach is saying that he's unsure as to whether or not they're going to recommend any charges when they turn this case over to the city prosecutor.
And they did not have weapons on them.
Right.
Now, in the beginning, I have tremendous sympathy for him. You get burglarized 3 times, you're going to be mad, man. And you finally got them, you caught them, and they beat him down. He goes into another room to get his weapon, right? They broke his collarbone. I mean, all the sympathy in the world to this guy, right? I mean, guy had enormous frustration from these assholes. They keep robbing you, and now they beat you down. You're 80 years old. And he gets the gun. If there was any kind of self-defense, it's a no-brainer, and we're going to let him go, right? But you can't shoot people in the back, right? And he says it. He's the one who admits it. Like, she's pregnant. She wasn't visibly pregnant. It's not like she's 8 months pregnant. She said she was pregnant, but she said it. He heard it. He tells it. It's not like he's hiding it. He's being very honest there. And he says, I shot her in the back. I got her, right? Look, I don't know. In America, I feel like we've gotten used to, like, it's okay, you come into my house, I get to shoot you in any way I like. It's actually not true, right? If they're running away from you and you had to step outside of your house and you knowingly shot them in the back, well, you kind of executed them.
So I'm actually way more torn on this story. Actually, I'm not torn. I have pretty strong feelings on it. Look, if his home has been burglarized 3 times, and then he's in a situation where 2 burglars are putting him in a violent altercation, right? He broke his collarbone. And look, this is stuff that's all alleged. So I don't know whether or not he was actually beaten or if he was actually injured to the extent that he's indicating. But if that did happen, you're afraid, you're scared, you think they're gonna come back, right? And so I think if I were in the same situation as he was, I would probably want to ensure that they're not going to come back and harm me again. So I can kind of understand his reasoning for doing it. And you know how I feel about guns. You know how I feel about people and the castle doctrine and these stand your ground laws. In this case, I don't think it's quite clear. I think that I would probably react in a similar way. I'd be afraid.
Yeah, I think that the worry that, especially since you had been physically fighting them and you think that they've already been there before, that they were burglarizing you again, I mean, the chance that if you don't shoot them, if they totally get away, the cops can't track down who they are, you would be worrying about living in fear from that point out. You might have been living in fear in the recent past because he'd already been burglarized several times. But for me, the only thing that really that makes me want the police to investigate him further is the specific wording of his quotes. There's something very eerie and cold and almost inhuman in the way that he described what happened, almost as if he was purposefully trying to portray himself as inhuman and not caring about what he'd done. It could very well be that he's in some sort of shock after having killed someone. That's possible. We don't have any evidence that he's killed people in the past. But it was a weird way that he described what happened.
I would prosecute. You guys talked me into it the other way. I understand what you guys are saying, and it's a tough case, but I don't want to put a marker out there for everybody. You don't shoot people in the back. If they're running away from you, don't shoot them.
I don't think
she also wasn't in his house when he shot her.
That's right.
She was already
out
off
of the house.
the property.
That's true.
Right. And so I think that's so. By the way, if she was in the house, then he has a much tighter legal defense because of the castle doctrine. Yeah. If they're in your house and you're already in a violent altercation, I mean, there's no way they're going to charge him, right? But he's clearly chasing her out of the house and says she's out of the house and says he shot her in the back. If I'm a prosecutor, I can't have you shooting people in the back. I can't do it. Like, yes, theoretically, they could come back at some point, but anybody could come back at some point, right? And so, don't get me wrong, I've now said 3 times, tremendous sympathy for the guy. I mean, if it was your house that got broken into 3 times, you'd be so mad. And then you're 80 years old and they beat you down. I get his anger, I get his rage, and I feel sympathetic.
I think it goes beyond anger and rage. I think that there's fear involved as well. So if my home had been burglarized several times, and then one day I come home at 9 p.m. and there's a man there and he beats the shit out of me, and I get my hands on a gun, you better believe I'm going to shoot him down. And maybe that's against the law, but I'm just saying I understand his intentions and the reason why he did what he did.
If in the middle of the altercation you shot him down, everybody would agree with you because you're protecting yourself. Yeah. I don't believe you when you say you chase him out of the house and shoot him in the back.
I think I would be so afraid of him coming back and harming me that I would do it.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so I vote yes on prosecution, you vote no on prosecution.
No. That I disagree with. I think that he should be prosecuted, but if I were on the jury, I would find him not guilty.
That's interesting. What do you guys say?
I would say definite psychiatric evaluation, and I don't know enough about the self-defense laws in California to say whether or not what he did was actually legal.
What he actually did is actually illegal.
Illegal.
It's illegal.
By the way, really fast, we are very quick to point out when something like this happens in Alabama or Florida or Texas, like, look how crazy the South is, but this was Long Beach. I mean, it's not that far, half an hour, 40 minutes away from here. So this is kind of a countrywide problem, just to be fair.
And of course, whether it's legal or not, whether he's guilty or not, gets adjudicated in court, not here. I just have to do that standard caveat all the time. We're saying based on the information, incomplete information we have now, we're judging those circumstances. So, Wes, your conclusion?
I think you should be charged with manslaughter.
Yeah.
And if someone's in your house, you should assume they're a threat and act accordingly. But when they're outside the house running away, I mean, why didn't he just shoot her? He said, I'm pregnant. Boom, shoot her right there. Why wait till she turns around and runs? You had to think about, she's pregnant. Should I? She's already off the property. I mean, what's he thinking?
Chance.
He's losing his chance.
Yeah.
So losing his chance means maybe he wasn't as scared.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, he had a broken collarbone. He was chasing after them. So I think that he shot once he finally had an opportunity to shoot them.
Yeah, but don't you think the second he pointed a gun and she said, "I'm pregnant," that was his opportunity right there. When she saw he had a gun and was pointing it at her, that was the opportunity, not, she's going to get away.
See, that's an interesting case by Wes. And if you don't know the history of the Young Turks, Wes has at other times vigorously defended the ability to shoot inside your home without asking questions. Okay. Now, what he's pointing out there is that he had, it appears, ample time to make a decision. And he chose to go in a certain direction. Again, the actual court case will decide this if they ever charge him, right? Because then you'd have to see exactly how it went down. But based on the loose evidence we have here, I think it's enough. I agree, manslaughter. I'd charge him with
not murder.
That's
murder.
Right.
I would have said, just final point for me, he spoke a couple of times about what she said during it. I would have liked him to have said, "I told her get on the ground or I'll shoot." She didn't, so I shot. If you're worried about her getting away, then tell her, "I've got a gun, you better get on the ground."
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that he did that.
By the way, her accomplice did get caught, and he is going to be charged, or is facing murder charges, because he was involved with a crime that ultimately led to her death.
Now that I don't agree with. I don't think he should be charged with murder for it.
Yeah, that's the felony murder rule. And it's controversial, but it's been used for a long time in America, that if you are involved in any crime where anyone gets killed, it's on you. And so that often happens in bank robberies. I mean, it's just an example they use in law school, and it does actually happen in real life. But you go to rob a bank, you bring a gun, security guard shoots your accomplice, you go away for murder for the rest of your life. Felony murder rule, right? So that's what's happening here. And basically they're saying, well, don't commit felonies, especially don't commit them with guns. But in this case, they didn't have guns. He had the gun. But nonetheless, it's a felony, so still the felony murder rule. Now, in his case, I'd throw the book at him for the 3 robberies if they got him on the 3 robberies, because he's an asshole and he's a menace to the neighborhood, right?
No question.
And for bringing her, especially if she really was pregnant and all that stuff. But no, I wouldn't charge him with murder. That's they didn't even bring a gun. I mean, if they had brought a gun and they got into a shootout, then yes, okay, this makes a lot more sense for felony murder, right? Even though he's a giant fucking prick. Okay.
All right.
Was that clear enough on that?
Completely different.
Honey, I'm pregnant. Great, let's go out and rob some shit.
Yeah, and when we run in that 80-year-old man that we might have robbed 2 other times, let's kick the shit out of him and punch him in the face and break his collarbone.
You'd think if they robbed him a couple times, they'd know he had a gun.
Right.
They're not very good at what they
We're
do.
such libs. Even though we got no sympathy for the guy, we're still like, don't charge him. Even though we have great sympathy for the 80-year-old, we're like, charge him. Okay.
All right. During the offseason, Baltimore Ravens running back Ray Rice had gotten into a physical altercation with his then fiancée. In fact, there was footage of him and his fiancée at the time in an elevator in Atlantic City. We want to show that to you, and then I'll give you more details.
So obviously she's knocked out unconscious there, and he's trying to figure out a way to drag her back into presumably an apartment. And clearly he hit her before the camera started rolling there, before the elevator doors opened, and he hit her obviously hard enough to knock her out, and then he's trying to figure out how to carry her. TMZ started TMZ Sports. They caught that, of course, got it leaked to them, and now it's out there. And so 2-week suspension is about as light a suspension as you obviously you can give a 1-week suspension, but
it's a 2-game suspension. I don't know if it's a game a week, and that's why you're saying 2 weeks.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Okay. So as we all know, if you get suspended for marijuana use 3 times, you get a 4-week suspension, 4-game suspension, right? even if the marijuana use is in off season. So there's obviously something wrong here. I mean, that's obviously chilling video.
It is legal, in quite a few states.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what if you're play at Mile High Stadium and it's legal in Colorado to be Mile High? Okay, but you can get suspended for 4 weeks. That's not legal anywhere.
Isn't Josh Gordon going to be suspended for an entire year because he tested positive for drugs?
Josh Gordon's got some serious drug issues.
He does, he does. He was caught drunk driving. He didn't pass the drug test. But still, I mean, look, in this situation with Josh Gordon, like, I would argue you want to make sure that he gets rehabilitated, get him the help that he needs, right? He's causing harm to himself more than anything. When he gets behind the wheel and he's drunk, he could potentially cause harm to others, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But he needs help. In this case, you have someone who literally knocked out the woman that he was about to marry. He did end up marrying her, which is amazing.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, they got married a month later.
Right after the indictment. Literally a day after the indictment. But actually, those things might not be it might not be a coincidence. It might be damage control, right? Maybe. So now she's, of course, turned around and is on his side. Oh, but I hit him too, and then they're pursuing charges against her because she also hit him, right?
He took the hit a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, it appears, right? But you see,
It's going to be a hell of a divorce when it inevitably comes.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order to make all this good, he winds up marrying her, right? And in which case, she's probably going to be enormously wealthy at some point. And she's 100% supportive, and he only gets a 2-week suspension. Everybody continues to make money, including the NFL. So now, I assume that the NFL thinks that there are mitigating circumstances, such as the wife being 100% on his side now. But the evidence that we see there on tape is pretty damning. I would have at least given the same suspension as a drug offense, as a marijuana offense. You got to go at least 4 weeks there. It's actually stupid to not do the 4 weeks, no matter what you think of the ethics of it.
Maybe the NFL was just trying to save her a second beating for getting him suspended for so long.
Yeah. Well, that goes to Stephen A. Smith's point.
Yeah.
Because Stephen A. Smith, of course, can't help himself, so he jumps in the middle of this.
Yes.
And as usual, says the most obnoxious things any human being can say.
So let me give you a little sense of what Stephen A. Smith had to say about this case. He's, according to Business Insider, after saying that it is wrong for men to put their hands on women, ESPN host Stephen A. Smith goes on to say that he has always encouraged female members of his family to make sure we don't do anything to provoke wrong actions. Smith later says that women need to do their part in making sure that violence doesn't happen. Now, let me give you a little more. I want to give you his exact quote as opposed to people paraphrasing what he had to say. On ESPN, he said the following: "We got to also make sure that you can do your part to do whatever you can to try to make sure it doesn't happen. We know they're wrong. We know they're criminals. We know they probably deserve to be in jail. In Ray Rice's case, he probably deserves more than a 2-game suspension, which we both acknowledged. But at the same time, we also have to make sure that we learn as much as we can about elements of provocation. We've got to do this. I'm sorry. We've got to do it. Do is okay. I don't know what that is.
We've got to do is do.
Is do what we can to try to prevent the situation from happening in any way. I don't think that's broached enough, is all I'm saying.
And I don't think it will be after this, considering what happened.
Well, I don't understand what he's saying. Like, I've heard people say, hey, you know what, don't walk down a dark alley and don't be alone at night, don't wear a short skirt. All these things that some will say is blaming the victim in case of rape, and others will say, no, I'm just telling, like, if it was my daughter, I wouldn't walking down a dark alley at night. It doesn't justify the guy who did it, but I just want to protect her. In the case of domestic violence, I've literally never heard it. I mean, how do you provoke domestic violence? There's not a dark alley in your house. Like, what is he saying? Shut up? Yeah. Don't talk back against your man. What is he saying? I don't even understand what he's saying.
He doesn't clarify that at all. I watched the ESPN
she hit him,
clip.
Right?
She says that she hit him. I don't know if that was what he was referring to, but that's the thing. Stephen A. Smith doesn't clarify what he's referring to. And so I totally agree that any type of physical altercation is totally unacceptable, regardless of who does it, whether it's a man or a woman. But when it comes to men and women, there's obviously a little bit of a power imbalance. And what I mean by that is men are obviously stronger than women, in most cases, not all cases. So in this case, he knocked the shit out of her, right? And so if you use this story to make your point about how women are provoking domestic violence, you're using a really, really bad example. Yeah. You're talking about an NFL player. who's obviously bigger and stronger.
And by the way, I mean, like we can sort of like debate what he meant philosophically based on what he said, but I did take note that he said he probably deserved more than a 2-game suspension. No, he definitely deserved more than a 2-game suspension. That's some bold journalism from ESPN right there.
Now, Stephen A. Smith, the A stands for asshole, is what it stands for, on almost every issue. So he is the same guy with, blaming basically Trayvon Martin in that situation. Why? I don't know why. I don't know what goes through his stupid head, right? But he thinks he's being so, even-handed and like, black people need to not assume that Trayvon is right just because he's black. But nobody assumed that. We looked at the facts. Unlike you're a knucklehead. You don't look at the facts. What did you do? You assume that Trayvon is wrong because he is black? I mean, he got shot. But it's, slightly similar theme. Trayvon is dead on the ground, never had a weapon. Guy with a gun killed him. He says, well, don't assume he's right. Like, maybe he provoked it, right? And in this case, there's someone knocked unconscious on the ground, and he says, well, in essence, he's implying maybe she provoked it. Because sometimes women do things that get this reaction, and they should watch out not to do those things so we don't have to knock them out.
Yeah,
right?
And by the way, I agree with half that argument. Women shouldn't do those things. So if a woman thinks it's a good idea to slap a man or hit a man or do anything physical like that, it's unacceptable. But it's up to the man to be the bigger person, both, mentally and physically, and not hit her back. You divorce her, go to couples counseling, you got to handle it in a different way because you're physically stronger.
So 2 things about that. Number one, it doesn't have to be just gender-based. So if a 13-year-old kid punches you in the arm, you have an obligation as a grown-ass man not to knock him to the other side of the room, okay? Because you're much bigger than him. So he was wrong. He punched me in the arm. But you're a million times more wrong if with your great strength you punch him in the face. It's common sense, right? Second of all, you're letting him off the hook. I don't think he was even referring to her hitting him. He never said it, okay? He just talked about provoking the guy, okay?
You think it's just he's saying don't talk back?
I think he's just generally saying, hey, you know how you are. Look, and so don't run your mouth. Now I'm putting words in his mouth, but I don't know what he's saying because he was so vague about like provoking a guy. What do you mean provoking a guy? He never specifically referred to her hitting him, right? So he has something under his skin about how women. Look, the sense I got from what he literally said was, women sometimes they drive you crazy, so don't drive the guy crazy, right? No. That does not in any way justify hitting a woman. He's so fake too. He loves ginning up controversy because that's what he gets paid for. Fake controversy. He doesn't even really believe half the things he says. Everything he says must be shouted, right? And he thinks controversy or having a stupid point of view is by definition being honest or like genuine. It's not genuine. You yell about everything, and he's pathetic. And so here he is again, and what he does is he stirs up controversy, and then he goes, what? Oh, I'm such a interesting controversial figure.
I have no idea who he is, so unless you showed a picture of this guy talking, I'm clueless.
Wow, someone who watches ESPN less than me. I actually recognize him at least.
He feels like people are misrepresenting what he had to say. One of his colleagues, Michelle Beadle, responded to it and said, what he said in that segment was absolutely unacceptable. I was in an abusive relationship once. I'm aware that men and women can both be the abuser. To send a message that we not provoke violence or provoke is wrong. Violence isn't basically the victim's issue. It's the person who's carrying out the violence against the victim, right? So Stephen A. Smith saw that, and he felt, oh my God, I'm being misrepresented, so now I need to really clarify it. And he did so through a series of tweets, and I want to read those tweets to you. I'm not going to read you all of them, just the ones that kind of summarize what his point is.
Could you yell them for us?
So he says the following: if a man is pathetic and stupid enough to put his hands on a woman, which I have never ever done, by the way, of course he needs to pay the price. Who on earth is denying that? But what about addressing women on how they can help prevent the obvious wrong being done upon them? In no way was I accusing a woman of being wrong. I was simply saying that the preventative measures always need to be addressed because there's only but so much that can be done after the fact, once the damage is already done. nothing more. My apologies to Michelle Beadle. He also says, and any woman out there who misconstrued what I said, I have always and will always find violence against a woman or women every bit as horrific as women themselves find it. Always have, always will, which my personal behavior exemplifies. I'll strive to be more articulate in the future, but be clear, I wasn't blaming women for anything. I was simply saying to take all things into consideration for preventative purposes, period.
I still don't know what he means. Yeah, I still don't know what he means by preventative purposes.
Yeah, give an example.
Okay, he's saying if you're hanging out with a huge person who's on steroids, whose job is to hurt people every weekend, maybe you shouldn't piss them off.
Yeah.
or choose somebody different to hang out with.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're saying don't hang out with Ray Rice, okay, well then say it, right? Because I mean, I didn't get that from what he's saying. And if he's saying don't hit him, well, that's actually your best defense. Say it.
Yeah.
But he never says it, right? He's going to say it later because it is his best defense. He'll pretend it was about that later, okay? Basically, what he seems to be saying is don't piss him off, okay? And that's not acceptable, man.
I know it's hard to fit a lot of meaning into 140 characters, but he had like 1.5 thousand there, and he still didn't give one
Didn't
freaking
clarify.
example of what he meant.
Because he knows he's in the wrong. He can't clarify because he doesn't know how to get himself out of it. I think his tweets were even more vague than the statement he made on ESPN.
And by the way, like the experience of Anthony Cumia just about 2 weeks ago shows that if you're embroiled in some sort of controversy that like theoretically could spiral out of control and make you lose your show, don't address it on Twitter.
Yeah.
No one's ever communicated anything on Twitter before.
Twitter's a great way of making detailed, valid points about things.
Yeah. No, and the other reason that you shouldn't go on Twitter if you're wrong like this is because if you just wait, you'll come up with a better bullshit explanation later, right? Yeah. Instead, he rushed out there and said the same things again that made it worse, right? Like he could have said preventative as in seeing the telltale signs from Ray Rice, she should have left earlier in the relationship,
That's
right?
blaming the victim.
I know, but it at least is slightly better,
It's
right?
kind of blaming the victim. On the other hand, why are people surprised when they marry somebody who makes their living through violence that then they're subjected to the violence?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, because that's not quite fair. The steroids is a whole different issue, right? But like I played football in high school, but I didn't.
Getting into fights.
That's true.
You liked getting in fights.
That's true. And he does
Right,
hit
but I
employees
didn't.
a lot.
But I didn't get into fights with little children and women. You know what I'm saying?
That we know of.
Yeah. By the way, this is probably slanderous, so cut this out of the video. But how many journalists right now are like just desperately trying to contact that dude's exes and try to find some example of domestic abuse? Because he
Stephen A.
kept
Smith?
saying, "I've never done it. I exemplify behavior of not doing that. I'm totally against it." Seems pretty defensive there.
Believe me, he's at least had conversations with
I
his
have no
friends about like, sometimes they egg you on, You tell me he hasn't had that conversation? No way. All right, one last thing. Jerry, you're going to go through this whole segment and not say one thing about Stephen A. Smith? Yes, you are.
Wow.
Okay, all right. Okay, fair enough.
So let's. Do you want to jump in or no?
He didn't provoke me.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, there's a morality organization that is on the war path against 50 Shades of Grey. We'll tell you why. The details are awesome. Stick around.